Hello again. Today we're looking at George Harrison's third solo album, his first conventional rock album after the Beatles breakup, and one that still stands as many fans' #1 solo Beatle album of all. All Things Must Pass. I personally have heard this album many times. It was a triple vinyl album when it came out in 1970, and to be more precise, I've heard the first 2/3 of it many times. Like most fans maybe, the third album has always gotten less attention from me. It's made up almost entirely of long instrumental guitar jams. Before listening to All Things Must Pass in its entirety a few days ago for this big solo Beatles project I'm doing, I may have only heard those tracks once or twice ever, maybe, and that would have been 25 years ago maybe. But this time I set aside a couple hours and listened to all of All Things Must Pass, from the first track to the final noisy guitar jam. And before we get into details, let me say that for the first 2/3, the more familiar collection of songs, the adjective that kept springing to my mind was miraculous. And for the long guitar jams, well, I was pleased to find that they were each distinct, each with its own character, and much of it was quite nice. And in an unexpected way, the third album does fit in well with the album as a whole. So All Things Must Pass has a reputation of being a product of George Harrison's pent-up creative frustration. He had been developing as a songwriter during the Beatles years, but with John and Paul in the group, there just wasn't space on albums, nor appetite in that duo's hearts, to devote to George's music. Now, I especially like George's Beatles songs, especially as we get up to the White Album and Abbey Road. In fact, everyone conceded that Something and Here Comes the Sun were top-shelf Beatles songs. But there was a lot more, and the Beatles as a unit weren't interested. And so, George took all the songs he'd been amassing, added to them, including the opening song, I'd Have You Any Time, which he co-wrote with Bob Dylan, and got his friends together and recorded everything in mid-1970. The Beatles appeared to be finished by this point, although this history is kind of vague and nobody really seems sure if they were done, or just on some kind of unprecedented long hiatus. To clear their heads, man. Either way, George exploded, musically. And so this album's reputation is entirely deserved. It does sound like that. All Things Must Pass is a very long collection of uniformly great songs, played with a heady fervor that makes them, individually and collectively, miraculous. George was able to take control of the grandeur of the Beatles' legend and fame and infuse these recordings with it. It's like he's bending the scale of the Beatles' legend to his own will. I mean, it sounds big, really big. It may be the most self-assured album ever recorded. Maybe. It all starts with great songs. Tunes that would be good with a full band like they are, or simply on a lone acoustic guitar, or maybe a piano, or a kazoo. Anything. All of these songs are like that. In fact, the whole album is based on guitar. Drums and piano and vocals and everything tend to step aside and make way for the onslaught of guitars. And they're all melodic, with every surprising chord just in the right place. Every lyric is searching and questing, professing awe at the divine presence in George's life, and promising desperately and passionately to always struggle to please his sweet Lord. So what happens when you take a batch of excellent songs like these and let Phil Spector produce the album? You get All Things Must Pass. Nearly every song has an expansive sound, full of echoing acoustic and electric guitars. They're allowed to be as big as they want to be, and George and Phil were thinking big. All Things Must Pass is such a long album and of such high quality, and with such a grandiose sound that after a while it really draws you in. That's why it seems so miraculous again. It's a miracle that this music, which feels like it came from some other heavenly sphere, was even channeled into this world. Now that may sound high and mighty, but it's not an overstatement. This album really is that good. But it isn't foreboding. At heart, it's still just regular old rock and roll. I mean, sometimes it's folkier, like the acoustic guitar and harmonica-led Apple Scruffs. Sometimes it's friendlier, like the sweet Behind That Locked Door. Sometimes it's soaring and noisy, like on Let It Down and Wah Wah. But it's not intimidating, and that's its magic. The most well-known songs from All Things Must Pass arguably are My Sweet Lord, the title song, and What Is Life. Each of those has a different feel, but they all come from the same elevated plane as the rest of the album. If you only know, but like, those songs, imagine 15 more just as good. Which brings us to the third album, the one nicknamed Apple Jam. Get it? First of all, it's really 4 long guitar jams and 1 short music hall novelty song called It's Johnny's Birthday, and that one celebrates John Lennon's 30th birthday. And as I say, the guitar jams are all different. Like one's a Chuck Berry style jam, one is kind of funky, one is just one single chord. As George explained, they're too good to leave unreleased, but they're not really a part of the real album. So we included them as a sort of bonus disc, meant to be considered apart from the endless classics on records 1 and 2. The end result of my having listened to the entirety of All Things Must Pass is that I'm not going to categorically avoid Apple Jam like I have been, lo, these many years. The Apple Jam disc is cool. It's not the mysterious, fun, magical sing-alongs of the rest of the album, but those noisy guitar workouts are great, and they have their place. All Things Must Pass was released in November 1970, a couple months after Ringo's second album, Buku's of Blues, and just 2 weeks before John's Plastic Ono Band. Imagine that. No Beatles fanatic at this time, no matter how devoted a George Harrison fan, could possibly have known that something like this engrossing box set was coming from George. You might have guessed he would put out a great album based on his recent Beatles work, but nothing at all like this one. Everyone was stunned and impressed. Fans loved it, critics loved it, the other Beatles knew it was great, and it's been a legend ever since it came out. One odd thing about All Things Must Pass, exactly who played on each of its songs isn't fully known. A 2001 reissue attempted to give credit where it could, but it's incomplete. Some of the known and acknowledged musicians include, but are not limited to, Ringo, and Clapton, and Pete Drake, and Klaus Voormann, and Billy Preston, and Bobby Keys from the Rolling Stones, and Peter Frampton, and Dave Mason from Traffic, and Gary Brooker from Procol Harum. Even a very young Phil Collins plays conga drums on Art of Dying, etc., etc. Furthermore, the rumors of who might appear are especially intriguing. John Lennon, the band, Rick Wright from Pink Floyd, one wishes, but I have my doubts. All Things Must Pass is simultaneously exhausting and uplifting. It's heavy, but approachable. Despite its grandeur and its length, it's easy to throw onto your turntable or your playlist and just take the ride again, to the celestial spheres. This is what it sounds like when a phenomenon as enormous as the Beatles burns down, and their soft-spoken guitarist emerges like a triumphant phoenix. Thanks for the pepperoni, George. And thank you for watching. Subscribe for more Beatles solo album overviews, and I'll see you next time.